Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The galaxy was on the edge of chaos. Tensions between Earth and the alien coalition had escalated to the point where war seemed inevitable. At the heart of it all was territory, vast, resource-rich regions in the distant reaches of space that Earth had only begun to explore. The Galactic Council, the governing body that sought to mediate interstellar conflicts, had called for a meeting to discuss the matter. But when diplomacy failed, an alternative solution was proposed, one that harkened back to an ancient tradition of galactic peacekeeping, a race. The cosmic race was no ordinary competition. It was a test of speed, strength, strategy, and survival. Throughout the centuries, disputes between planets were sometimes settled by this grand event. The winners would gain their claim, while the losers would be forced to yield. It was a way to prevent widespread destruction, but it was also a battle of wits and skill on a cosmic scale. Earth had never participated in the race before. Humanity, a relatively new entrant into the intergalactic community, was still finding its place among the more advanced civilizations. But now, the stakes couldn't be higher. Earth's leaders knew that losing this race would mean more than just relinquishing territory. It would likely mean the collapse of Earth's fragile alliances with other planets, leaving them vulnerable to invasion and subjugation. In a desperate move, Earth's government turned to Tony and Clark. Tony was a technological prodigy from a young age. He had a gift for building things that no one else could even imagine. He made a name for himself by developing spacecraft systems that could rival some of the most advanced alien technology. He had a vision for how humanity could reach beyond its limits, but he wasn't much of a team player. For Tony, it was all about the machines, the technology. People just tended to get in the way. Clark was different. He was an athlete, a competitor through and through. Thanks to genetic enhancements from Earth's cutting-edge bioengineering programs, Clark possessed superhuman speed. He could run faster than any human or alien alive, but he wasn't just fast. He was strategic, calculating, always one step ahead of his opponent. He thrived in high-pressure environments, but he wasn't sure about Tony. They had never worked together before, and Clark wasn't convinced that technology alone could win the race. The Galactic Council's decision to hold the race was announced with great fanfare, and the participants were summoned to a neutral planet known as Akranos, located at the crossroads of several star systems. Akranos was a desert world, its vast landscapes dominated by towering sandstone cliffs and endless expanses of barren plain. It had once been a thriving hub of galactic trade, but now it served as the starting point for one of the most dangerous competitions in the known universe. As Tony and Clark arrived on Akranos, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The other competitors had already begun arriving, each representing a different world, each with their own unique abilities and technology. Some were renowned for their speed, while others relied on brute strength or advanced weaponry to outmaneuver their rival. There were rumors of sabotage, of underhanded tactics that could derail Earth's chances before the race even began. The Galactic Council, a group of elder statesmen from various worlds, gathered in the main hall to explain the rules. The race would take place across multiple sectors, each with its own set of challenges. It wasn't just about who crossed the finish line first. Survival was just as important. Competitors would need to navigate asteroid fields, gravitational anomalies, and even temporal distortions that could trap them in pockets of warped time. But most importantly, they would have to face each other. Remember, the council speaker said in a deep, resonant voice, this race is not only a test of speed. It is a test of strategy, of intelligence, and of cooperation. There will be obstacles that cannot be overcome by strength alone. Tony smirked as he glanced over at Clark. Cooperation, he wasn't sure how much he could rely on that. He was used to working alone, solving problems with technology and ingenuity. But now the survival of Earth depended on their ability to work together. Back at the hangar, Tony inspected the ship he had designed for the race. It was sleek, angular, and made of materials that could withstand extreme pressure and heat. The ship's name, Velocity, was etched on its side in bold letters. Tony had incorporated alien tech into the design, using what he had learned from studying the ships of other races. It wasn't just fast, it was adaptable, with shielding systems that could modify themselves based on the environment. Clark stood nearby watching as Tony tinkered with the ship's side engine. He wasn't a mechanic, but he knew enough about speed to appreciate the importance of the ship's on. His role in the race would be different. He would be piloting the ship at crucial moments, relying on his reflexes and instincts to navigate through the toughest sections of the course. His enhanced speed wasn't just about running, it affected his entire body, giving him quicker reactions and heightened senses. "You think this thing will hold up?" Clark asked, folding his arm. Tony didn't look up from his work. "It'll do more than hold up, it'll win." Clark raised an eyebrow, bold statement. "Considering we haven't even seen the competition up close yet." Tony finally glanced up. "We don't need to see them. We just need to be faster, smarter, and more prepared. Let them play their games. We'll win with science." Clark wasn't convinced, but he wasn't about to start an argument. He needed to focus. The race was only hours away, and they had a lot of work to do if they were going to beat the odds. The morning of the race dawned with a fiery red sky over Carano. The competitors gathered at the starting line, their ships gleaming under the harsh light of the desert sun. The atmosphere was tense, and Tony could feel the weight of every other racer's gaze on them. Earth's participation in this race was a gamble. No one really expected them to win. Humanity was still seen as the underdog, a species that had barely scratched the surface of interstellar travel. The starting line was a massive platform suspended in the air, hovering above the ground with anti-gravity technology. The ships were lined up side by side, each one a testament to the technological prowess of the worlds they represented. Some ships were hulking behemoths, bristling with weapons and shields. Others were sleek and streamlined, built for speed and agility. Tony's velocity was somewhere in between, a balance of power and finesse, designed to adapt to whatever challenges lay ahead. Clark climbed into the pilot's seat, adjusting the controls as Tony ran through the final checks on the ship system. Everything seemed in order. The engine hummed with power, the shields were at full capacity, and the navigation system was synced to the race course. The Galactic Council speaker stepped forward, his voice booming across the platform. "Racers, prepare yourselves. The first section of the race will take you through the Acronios asteroid field. From there, you will navigate the treacherous rings of the gas giant Eureka before entering the sector of the unknown. Beware of the gravity wells and temporal distortions that await you. The first racer to cross the finish line on the planet Exirion will be declared the victor." As the speaker finished, a low rumble filled the air. The starting platform began to shake as the anti-gravity generators powered up. In the distance, Tony could see the asteroid field looming like a dark cloud on the horizon. It was the first major challenge, and it would test their ship's maneuverability and Clark's reflexes to the limit. "Ready?" Tony asked, sliding into the co-pilot seat. Clark nodded, his eyes fixed on the course ahead. "Let's do that." The countdown began, and the tension in the air was palpable. Tony's fingers hovered over the controls, ready to activate the ship. Thrusters the moment the signal was given. Clark tightened his grip on the yoke, his heart pounding in his chest. 3, 2, 1. The starting signal blared, and the ships launched into the sky with a thunderous roar. Velocity shot forward, its engines roaring as it accelerated toward the asteroid field. Clark's hands moved in a blur as he adjusted the ship's trajectory, weaving through the initial wave of debris with ease. Tony monitored the systems, keeping a close eye on the shield levels and engine output. Behind them, the other ships jostled for position, some already firing off shots in an attempt to disable their competitor. Tony activated the adaptive shields, watching as they shifted in response to the incoming fire. The ship hummed with energy, the shields absorbing and deflecting the attack. "We are clear for now," Tony said, glancing at the radar, "but it's only going to get worse from here." Clark nodded, his focus unwavering. "Let them come. We've got this." As they entered the asteroid field, the debris became denser, the chunks of rock growing larger and more unpredictable. Clark's reflexes were put to the test as he dodged and weaved through the obstacles, his enhanced speed allowing him to make split-second adjustments. The ship moved like a shadow, slipping through the gaps in the asteroids with precision. But then, out of the corner of his eye, Tony saw something. One of the larger ships was angling toward them, its weapons locked on. "Brace yourself," Tony shouted. Clark reacted instantly, pushing velocity into a sharp dive as the enemy ship opened fire. Bright streaks of energy crackled through space, barely missing their craft. Tony's fingers flew across the controls, rerouting power to the shields while keeping a close eye on their surroundings. The asteroid field was unforgiving. One wrong move, and they to be reduced to debris. We can outrun them in here, Tony muttered, his mind racing. They've got the advantage in firepower. Clark's jaw tightened. Then we outmaneuver them. He yanked the controls hard to the right, narrowly avoiding a cluster of spinning rock. The enemy ship, a hulking beast with thick armor, tried to follow, but it couldn't match their agility. It clipped one of the asteroids, sending chunks of debris scattering through space. Tony grinned as he saw the ship fall back slightly, but they weren't out of danger. Yet more ships were closing in, and the asteroid field was becoming a maze of destruction. Clark veered left, threading velocity between two massive boulders. The ship shuddered as the shields absorbed another blast, but Tony's adjustments held steady. The adaptive shields pulsed with energy, redirecting the incoming fire just in time. They had only seconds to react as another barrage from a third ship rained down on them. "Hang on," Clark shouted, pulling the ship into a steep climb. Beauty forces pressed against them, but velocity responded beautifully, cutting through the field like a blade. Tony's eyes flicked to the radar. They were still tailing us, but we've got some breathing room. Head for the far side of the field. There's a gap in the debris we can slip through. Clark nodded, his hands steady on the controls. He could feel the pressure mounting, but this was where he thrived. The faster they went, the more the world around him seemed to slow down. He could see every movement, anticipate every obstacle. They dodged another volley of fire, skimming the edge of a massive asteroid that was slowly rotating through space. Just as they reached the edge of the field, Tony's side console lit up with an alert. Incoming gravity anomaly braced for turbulence. Before Clark could respond, the ship lurched violently. The gravitational pull from a nearby anomaly yanked them off course, dragging velocity toward a swirling vortex. The thrusters sputtered under the strain, and Tony frantically rerouted power to keep the ship from being torn apart. "We were getting pulled in," Tony shouted, gripping the edge of his seat. Clark fought the controls, every muscle straining as he tried to wrestle the ship back on course. The vortex loomed closer, a churning mass of distorted space-time that threatened to consume them. He could feel the ship groaning under the pressure, but he wasn't about to give up. "Hold on," Clark growled through clenched teeth, pushing the engines to their limit. The ship's hull vibrated violently as they neared the edge of the vortex, but just as they seemed doomed to be swallowed whole, velocity broke free, rocketing out of the anomaly with a final burst of speed. Tony let out a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding that was too close. Clark wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart still pounding. We were not dead yet. They were out of the asteroid field, but the race was far from over. The next challenge loomed ahead, the treacherous rings of Urakua, gas giant known for its violent storms and unpredictable magnetic field. The racers who made it this far would have to contend not only with each other, but with the planet's natural defenses. As velocity approached the planet, the ship's sensors picked up a sudden spike in electromagnetic activity. Tony's Cylinder flew over the console, trying to compensate for the interference. "We're going to lose comms in this sector. We'll be flying blind." Clark adjusted their heading, keeping his eyes on the swirling clouds of gas below. The rings of Urakua were a beautiful but deadly sight, a shimmering band of dust and ice that circled the planet like a crown. But within those rings lurked magnetic storms that could rip a ship apart in seconds. The other racers were already scattered throughout the rings, some trying to brute force their way through, while others used stealth and cunning to avoid detection. Tony knew that their best chance was to stay low and keep their profile minimal. They couldn't afford to draw attention now. Clark dipped the ship into the outer edge of the ring, skimming just above the gas giant's atmosphere. The magnetic interference was already wreaking havoc on their systems, but Tony managed to keep the shield stable. The ship glided through the dust and ice, leaving a faint trail behind as it moved through the storm. Suddenly, a warning flashed on Tony's screen. "Another ship said, coming up fast. Looks like they're retrying to force us out of the ring." Clark glanced at the radar. "How close?" "Close enough," Tony said grimly. "We've got maybe 30 seconds before they on top of it." Clark tightened his grip on the controls. "I'll take care of it." He pushed the ship into a series of sharp turns, weaving through the dense debris of the ring. The pursuing ship was larger, bulkier, but faster than he had expected. They were trying to force velocity into the planet's atmosphere where the storms would tear them apart. Tony's mind raced as he calculated their options. "We can fight them head on, but I might be able to overload their system. The magnetic field here is unstable. If I can redirect some of the interference, we might knock out their engine." Clark grinned. Do it. Tony pulled up the ship as tactical display, isolating the magnetic anomalies in the area. With a few quick adjustments, he rerouted the interference through the ship's shields, amplifying the electromagnetic pulses. The pursuing ship closed in, its weapons primed and ready to fire. Now, Tony shouted. Clark hit the thrusters, sending velocity into a steep dive. As they plummeted toward the planet's surface, Tony unleashed the electromagnetic pulse. The pursuing ship wobbled, its systems scrambling under the overload. For a moment, it looked like it might recover, but then its engines flickered and died, sending it spinning out of control into the storm below. Clark leveled out the ship, pulling them back up into the safety of the rings that saw one down. Tony grinned, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, and about a dozen more to go. The rest of the trip through the rings was a nerve-wracking gauntlet of close calls and evasive maneuvers. At one point, they narrowly avoided a massive chunk of ice that could have easily crushed the ship. But as they emerged from the rings, the finish line seemed closer than ever. They had made it through two of the most dangerous sections of the race, but the final challenge awaited the unknown sector, a region of space notorious for its unpredictable gravitational wells and temporal distortion. Few had ever navigated it successfully, and many ships had been lost to its treacherous void. Tony's voice was tense as they approached the sector. This is where it gets tricky. Time and space don't behave the way they should in there. We'll need to rely on instincts as much as technology. Clark's expression hardened. I've got instinct. They entered the sector, and immediately the ship systems began to falter. The stars outside the viewport seemed to twist and warp, bending in ways that defied logic. Tony tried to stabilize the navigation systems, but the temporal distortions made it nearly impossible to get accurate reading. Suddenly, velocity was yanked to the side, caught in the pull of a gravity well. Clark struggled to keep the ship on course, but the forces at play were too strong. The ship was dragged toward the heart of the anomaly, the gravitational waves distorting time around them. We're not going to make it, Tony shouted, his voice strained as the ship groaned under the pressure. Clark's eyes narrowed. We'll make it. He pushed the engines to full power, but it wasn't enough. The gravity well was pulling them in faster than the ship could escape. Tony's mind raced, searching for a solution. If they couldn't outfly the anomaly, they'd have to outthink it. Then, in a flash of inspiration, Tony had an idea. I can use the ship's shields to create a temporal inversion. If we hit it at the right angle, we might be able to slingshot out of the distortion. Clark didn't hesitate. Do it. Tony rerouted all available power to the shields, modifying their frequency to create a reverse polarity. The ship lurched as the shields activated, creating a ripple in the temporal distortion. For a moment, it seemed like they were going to be swallowed by the anomaly, but then the ship shot forward, breaking free of the gravity, well and hurtling toward the finish line. They were almost there. As velocity rocketed through the final stretch, the other competitors closed in, their ships pushing to overtake them in a last-ditch effort. But Clark's enhanced reflexes, combined with Tony's ingenuity, kept them one step ahead. With the finish line in sight, Clark pushed the engines to their limit, the ship vibrating under the strain. Tony's fingers danced over the controls, adjusting the shields and stabilizers as they hurtled forward. And then with a final burst of speed, velocity crossed the finish line. The Galactic Council, its beacon flared, signaling the end of the race. They had won. Clark slumped back in his seat, his heart still racing. Tony let out a breath of relief, his hands shaking from the intensity of the final moment. They had done it. They had saved Earth. As the ship coasted to a stop, the reality of their victory began to sink in. They had beaten the odds, overcome sabotage and impossible obstacles, and emerged victorious in a race that would decide the fate of their planet. Tony turned to Clark, a grin spreading across his face. Told you we'd win. Clark chuckled, wiping the sweat from his brow. Yeah, but I didn't think it'd be that close. They stepped out of the ship, greeted by the cheers of the Galactic Council and the other spectators. Earth had earned its place among the stars, not through war, but through skill, strategy, and teamwork. The cosmic race was over, but Tony and Clark knew that this was only the beginning.